I call this meeting of the Pearland Independent School District Board of Trustees to order on June 9th, 2020 at 4:04 p.m. Let the record show that a quorum of board members is present, that this meeting has been duly called, and that notice of this meeting has been posted in accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act. Texas Government Code, Chapter 551. Let the record show that trustees Gooden, Carbone, Floyd, Murphy, Decker, Botkin, and Barry are all present. With the establishment of a quorum done, ladies and gentlemen, we're all aware of the funeral of Mr. George Floyd that is going on. Actually, it's finished, and Mr. Floyd is on his way to his final resting place here in Pearland. If you all would join me, please, in just a brief moment of silence in his memory. Thank you all very much. Thank you very much. Okay, we will go to public comment. We had one speaker who signed up to address the board. During this period, patrons are allowed 3 minutes to address the board. And in accordance with new state law, the board must prioritize the comments of those patrons who are addressing specific items on tonight's agenda. That is not an issue today since we only have one speaker. Mr. Stephen Kendrick, I see you, sir.
Yes, sir. How are you doing?
Good deal. I'm doing well. Let me, if you don't mind, let me get a clock going here. And when you are ready, thank you very much for joining us. And sending your emails. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, board. As Dr. Charles Gooden said, my name is Stephen Kendrick, and I'm a taxpayer and Pearland ISD parent. I'd first like to say that I truly appreciate all that y'all have done for our students during this unprecedented time full of uncertainties. I hate that during this time, House Bill 3 is requiring this year to be the first year of compression, where the tax rate must be decreased. I really think that we could have benefited from that money during this time with all of the unknowns coming up. But be that as it may, that part's out of our hands. I have several questions that I would like to bring to your attention and just request that you address. The board agenda didn't include a lot of the backup documentation, which likely has these answers in it. The first one is, what is the district doing in regards to your ADA number? Has estimated ADA been adjusted in anticipation of the effects of COVID-19 on student attendance? I see many other districts keeping it the same or adjusting it down slightly due to an anticipated higher absenteeism. Second question, was a reduction in tax collections considered, assuming the number of appeals that will likely take place this year? The third one is, I realize that the CARES Act provided Pearland ISD with $1.14786 million. And there are other funds available through the CRF and other programs. But I also realize that those funds in Special Revenue Fund 266 will likely not cover all increase in expenses due to COVID-19 and will require additional funds from the general fund. I saw the video that Dr. Kelly did, and I really appreciate that. And of the three options selected, it looks like there's probably going to be an increased cost regardless of which option that's chosen. Looking at the document provided in the agenda, I did not see any money allocated in the general fund for like a COVID-19 contingency for things such as substitute increase in number of bus routes, additional technology, internet, cleaning costs, PPE costs, prepackaged food costs, any possible campus disclosures due to a positive COVID test. And then also if the hybrid model is selected, it appears that the elementary and middle school teachers whose workday would be 8 hours like every other teacher will be extended, whether that's an hour and a half, 2 hours, I don't know. But is there any additional stipends or compensations for the teachers that their workday is being extended when the rest of their peers is not being extended? And so I realize you probably don't have all of these answers today, but I did just want to start that conversation and that thought process. I know that there's going to be a lot of concessions and we're all going to have to pull together and work together on this. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Kendrick. We really appreciate that.
Mr. President?
Yes, sir.
If I can insert, every one of Mr. Kendrick's questions are covered in good depth by Georgini, her presentation to be given here shortly, except for the very last one. We're still working on stipends and how pay might be changed for the fall, but all the rest of those I think you'll see well covered in today's presentation.
Okay, outstanding, outstanding. All right, thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Kendrick. Thank you, Dr. Kelly. All right, with that done, the board is going to adjourn into a closed session. No voting will take place in closed session. Any action that the board wants to take based on those discussions will be taken in public session, open session. And it is 4:11 p.m. and the board will now, this meeting is going to stay open and the board will now adjourn into its closed session. Thank you all very much. At 6:48 p.m., the board will reconvene in open session. No action was taken in closed session. I'll let the record show a quorum of board members is present: Gooden, Carbone, Bodkin, Decker, and Floyd.
I'm here, Charles.
Okay, Mr. Murphy is with us. Is there a motion?
Yes, sir. I have a motion. I move we accept and approve the superintendent's recommendation for employment of personnel as presented.
Second.
Motion Decker, second Floyd. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll go ahead and vote. Trustee Bodkin, how do you vote? Okay, Trustee Floyd, how do you vote?
Bodkin, good. Yes.
Okay, Bodkin, yes. Okay. Trustee Gooden votes yes. Trustee Carbone?
Aye.
Trustee Decker?
Aye.
Trustee Murphy?
Aye.
Motion carries 6-0 with Trustee Barry out of the meeting. All right. The next thing we will go to is a statement. As we mentioned earlier, we took a moment of silence to observe the memory of Mr. George Floyd. And with that being such a significant event and having such a significant nexus to Pearland, the board and superintendent would like to issue a statement as follows, and I'll read it into the record. As a society, we continue to grapple with the harsh realities of being Black in America. Today, George Floyd's family laid him to rest here in our community. The superintendent and board of trustees joined together to express our sincere condolences to his family and declare our stance against racism and discrimination. Pearland ISD's mission is to equip all learners to reach their highest potential. To our students, staff, administrators, and community members, we acknowledge that we still have far to go in the fight against racism. As the leaders of one of the most diverse school districts in Texas, we celebrate and value all students regardless of their religion, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, or gender, and affirm that Black lives do indeed matter. We truly believe the success of Pearland ISD is because of our beautifully diverse population. Our district continually teaches acceptance and love and will move to correct behavior from anyone opposite to those standards. Each student and staff member should be provided with a supportive and safe environment in which to thrive and meet their highest potential. We will continue to support the work of the Culturally Responsive Committee, which is having tough conversations dealing with structural racism. Our work is not done, and we look forward to thoughtful community engagement to make Pearland ISD a more equitable and just district. And trustees and Dr. Kelly, I thank you all very much for joining in expressing those sentiments. All right. We will go from there to our public hearing on the budget, the public hearing for the 2020-21 budget. And just for insight for all those who have joined us, the public hearing is required by state law And so what I will do is open that hearing, and I will ask our Chief Financial Officer, Mrs. Georgianne Carter, to give us an overview of the budget presentation. And during that overview, after the overview rather, you will be allowed to make comments and ask questions. Those will be addressed, and then we'll close the public hearing. But right after that, Mrs. Carter will continue to discuss, and she'll go into deeper detail on the budget as presented in the documents on the internet to the Board of Trustees. Keep in mind that today will not be our final approval of the budget. The final approval of the budget will come on June 23rd at our next meeting this month. So with that said, at 6:52 p.m., I will open a public hearing on the 2020-2021 Pearland ISD budget and tax rate. Mrs. Carter, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am sharing my screen now. In the interest of time, I decided to go ahead and put the budget hearing and the workshop together, if that's okay.
That's fine. That's actually
Okay,
a great
perfect.
idea. All right.
Okay, great.
So yeah, for all those
Okay.
listening, the public hearing will be just a little bit longer, but you'll get everything, all the information in the public hearing, and then be able to ask questions. Great idea. Thank you, ma'am.
All right, thank you. Okay, so for the discussion today, we're going to go through COVID-19 budget impacts, our year-end projections for this current fiscal year, and of course, our proposed budget for this next fiscal year. We're going to talk about property values, the tax rate and compression, a 3-year budget outlook, and our fund balance and commitments. We're also going to discuss the food service and the debt service fund. As a reminder, the board is required to approve appropriated funds, and those appropriated funds are consisting of the general fund, the food service fund, and the debt service fund. Starting with the current COVID-19 impact on this fiscal year. As we've all heard, there has been some funding that has been made available, some federal funding from the CARES Act, in particular, the ESSER fund, which is the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund. We're eligible for about $1.2 million. Now, one thing that is important to note here is that the state is basically using, or TA is basically using these funds to offset their revenues. So it's almost like a swap. So we're not getting new money, but basically our funding for this current fiscal year is going to be reduced by the ADA equivalent of the funds that we're receiving from the CARES grant. So we're going to have to set up a new fund, and the first thing that we're going to do is see if we can reallocate some of the current year expenditures, and if not, then we're going to see what can we use those funds for. So that is important information there. Also, for this current fiscal year, what TEA told us to do in regards to the 5th and 6th weeks for attendance is to look at how we did last year as of the average of the first 4-6 weeks in comparison to how we ended the full 6 weeks. And so that ratio we apply to our current 6 weeks average. And then, of course, for us, it was a bit of a reduction. And unfortunately, it's not just a reduction on the average daily attendance on the refined ADA, but it's also on the FTEs and the ADA for special populations, which tend to increase, even though our entire attendance tends to decrease a little bit during the last 6 weeks. That's not the case with our special populations, but that same ratio applies. So I'm going to show you how that impacts us. In addition to that, we've all seen that interest earnings have dropped completely. So we're adjusting a little bit for this last quarter of interest earnings, facility rental fees. If we can't have others use our space, we're losing some revenue on that. food sales for the portion of the paid meals. That's been reduced as well. And of course, we were going to have the regular summer school, and that was going to generate also some tuition, but we won't have that anymore. As far as expenditures, we did increase some of our expenditures for premium pay and some equipment and software that were purchased for distance learning, and some for teleworking as well. We also had some expenses for cleaning and protective supplies and equipment, and we continue to have those as well. But we also decreased other expenditures such as substitutes, extra duty pay for the after-school tutorials that ended up not happening, some utilities and fuel and travel costs. Now for 2021, for this next fiscal year, one of the ways that COVID-19 can impact our district is we may experience an increase in student absences. Now, I do want to mention that I just got some information while you were in executive session that TEA is going to provide us with attendance, accounting, and funding information for next year, this next Tuesday. So right now, the way that everything that I'm speaking to, it's based on current funding on normal operations. But on Tuesday, once we find out more from TEA on how they're going to account for attendance, I'll be able to provide you with additional information. Another thing that could happen is an increase in delinquent taxes if some of our citizens are not able to make their payments on time. Interest income will continue to be very low. And of course, continued loss of everything that I mentioned in the prior slide: rental revenue, gate receipts, and transportation revenue if we limit the ridership as well. As far as this next fiscal year, the state, they kind of have taken a stance that it's not really going to affect us, the current situation with the economy, but it will pretty much affect us in the next biennium. So once they start meeting in January, in the next legislative session, we'll be finding out more about how this may affect us. Some state agencies were directed to cut 5% of their budgets this year, so we may be exposed to that as well in the next biennium. Property values, they were not affected this year, but that's also something else that could potentially be affected next fiscal year. Some of the additional costs that we can experience next year could be increased remediation or instructions for students that could have potentially fallen behind during this period of time. Additional personal protective equipment for students and staff, and of course, cleaning and sanitizing costs, some health screening equipment, and some plexiglass or other ways that we can, other expenditures related to social distancing staff and students. Perhaps more substitute costs if we have more than usual teachers out because of COVID. Additional remote instruction software and equipment for teachers and students, psychological services and counseling, staff development for safety and remote learning, and childcare accommodations. Those could be some potential costs. As far as this year is concerned, as you can see here, our current amended budget on the revenue side is $185.6 million, projecting about a $2.1 million loss in revenues due to the adjustments that we've done for the average daily attendance reduction, as well as that money that we're getting for the ESSER grant. I'm basically deducting it from the general operating and setting up a separate fund. And as far as the expenditures are concerned, we are fixing to save about $5.1 million. So overall, As you can see, our ending fund balance projected for 1920 is approximately 62.5 million, which is about a 33% fund balance reserve for 120 days. All right, so that part up to there is how we're doing with this current fiscal year. At the next board meeting on June 23rd, I'm going to be bringing the final budget amendment. We'll be calculating final projected actuals and bringing a budget amendment to the board.
Georgianne,
All right.
are you currently
Yes.
that that what we expect the COVID costs to be if we were like earmarking financial, like a COVID category, it would be around that $2.1 million variance, or is that related to this cost?
No, so that 2.1 million variance that you see on the operating revenues is basically the adjustments due to the ADA and the money that we're getting for the ESSER grant that is being subtracted from the state funding and is being passed through as an ESSER. So it's a net zero. We're not getting extra money. Basically, TEA is using that CARES funding to offset the anticipated state revenue losses.
I'm sorry, I meant to point to the 5.1.
Oh, the 5.1 million, some of it is the natural savings throughout the year in payroll when we have vacancies or staff on leave, utility savings, so different types of savings that we have in this particular year. We probably have a little bit more savings than in prior years because overall this closure so far, as of right now, has saved more than the additional expenses due to COVID. We haven't had any substitute costs, even though we did have premium pay, it wasn't excessive. And of course, we didn't have tutorials, so tutorial creates a lot of extra duty costs as well. And there's a lot of expenses that occur in the latter part of the year that we're having savings on right now.
So on page 6, you talked about the impact of COVID for 2021. Do you have an earmark of data or an earmark of what potential costs could be there?
So we've been discussing in the Return to School Committee the different options of how we're going to handle our return to school next year. Do I have a set amount of cost? No, we've discussed several things. It depends on the option that we take. It depends if we decide to provide laptops and iPads for everyone, our transportation routes. I mean, there is so many variables. And we are pending to find out a little bit more. This budget, the way we build it, and it's a challenge for all of us school districts that are a June 30th school district. We don't have a lot of information yet. So everybody who's preparing a budget right now basically is preparing it on the foundation that normal operations next year, as if none of this COVID had happened. But once we start finding out more of our plans for next year, the funding from TEA, et cetera, then we're going to go ahead and bring you a budget amendments as needed. So we're going to have to look at our revenues and our expenses and adjust as we move through the year.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Carter, Mr. Floyd had a question as well.
Yeah, it's thank you, Charles. It's kind of in the same line as what Crystal was asking, and I know it may be impossible to answer right now, but you know, we not only have increased costs, but we also have increased savings as a result of the pandemic. Do you think it'll be a net loss?
No. That's for the current fiscal year. For this current fiscal year. For next year, it'll all depend on the funding guidance that we get from TEA, how they're going to fund us, if we do a hybrid method, if we do, whichever route we take, right? And then, of course, the tools that we need to provide to our staff as well as our students to be able to do that as well. So all that, it's still being decided as of today.
So it's very much up in the air, I guess.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Okay, so now I'm going to start on the part of the 2020-2021 budget. So one of the most important things in preparing the budget is knowing our property values. And for our property values, as you heard last month, we've had a 14.04% estimated growth from Brazoria County, and the portion from Harris County Appraisal District, it's about a 2.75% growth. For conservative purposes, we are estimating a 10.09% growth. And what I want to illustrate to you here is how, if you see down here, as the property value growth rate increases, in our case, I'm projecting for budget purposes a 10% growth, our compressed rate decreases. So the larger, basically the larger the growth, the more the savings to the taxpayers. So once we're, and I'm going to speak to it a little bit more in a little while, but CEA is basically going to tell us what our compressed rate is. For purposes of the notice, you saw that I advertised the highest possible rate. That's not the rate that I'm using for this budget. For this budget, I'm using a compressed tax rate of 0.8556. I'll take you back to, based on that 10.09% growth, which is around here. That gives me a 0.8556 tax rate. And to that, we're adding 5 golden pennies. To be able to add 5 golden pennies, right now we have 4. That requires unanimous board approval. So this budget was prepared with that 5th golden penny for a total M&O tax rate of 0.9056. The savings to the taxpayers right now are 6.44 cents per $100 valuation. This is a conservative estimate, as you saw. So if the actual percent growth is higher than the 10.09%, you'll see a lower compressed tax rate. For purposes of the debt service tax rate, we are keeping it the same at 0.4256. John Roebuck with BOK Financial, or Bond Financial Advisor, is with us today, and he's gonna walk us through, when we get to the debt service portion, on why we are deciding to keep the tax rate at the same level. So for the current fiscal year, our tax rate is 1.3956, and we built the budget with a 1.3312 total tax rate. So total savings of $6.44 cents. Okay, so the steps for setting the tax rate, being a July 1 school district, we had to post a notice before we even know what our allowable tax rate is, since CA is going to be telling us what that is. We use the compressed tax rate of 0.9164 plus 5 golden pennies, because we can adopt a lower tax rate, but we can never adopt one that is higher. So just to be on the safe side. TEA will survey us between July 18th and August 1st to inquire about our July certified values, and we'll calculate the Tier 1 tax rate for us by August 5th. If we were, in the event that we were to plan a TRE, then we would need to publish a notice to adopt the tax rate by August 7th and call an election by August 17th. If we don't call a TRE, I believe that we have until the September board meeting to adopt the tax rate, which we could do in August as well. Next slide. So as you can see, a decrease in the compressed tax rate, it will shift the funding from local taxpayer funding to the state. And if the local tax revenue decreases, then the Tier 1 funding increases, but it really has no overall impact. It's not like we're gonna generate additional funds because the tax rate swings one way or the other. It's basically if it's lower than the state provides more funding. The next bullet that I have here is just a requirement for the school first rating is no longer really applicable, but it's still there. So I'm required to state it. Prior to House Bill 3, prior year property values were used in the formulas to calculate state aid, causing a 1-year funding lag. If the local revenue decreased in the year of the property value decline, the state did not recognize the decline until the subsequent year. This year, since HB 3, we're going based on current property values, so this is no longer applicable. Now, proposed general fund revenues. Sorry. Okay, the funding elements that we use the projected enrollment of 21,934. The increase mainly is due to our expected growth in pre-kindergarten enrollment, as we were planning to move on to full day pre-K. But of course, those pre-K kiddos only generate half of the funding. And so, for average daily purposes, we use 21,595 enrollment, and I'm projecting a 96.7% attendance rate. The property value growth projected at 10.09%, and current year tax collections at 98. Here is where I adjusted a little bit. As well as with the attendance, I also adjusted a little bit when I calculated the funding for next year, because there is a possibility, again, that taxpayers may not be able to make their payments on time. So typically we collect about 98.65% of the current year taxes. So I build a budget based on a 98%. More conservative. Tier 1 compressed tax rate of 0.8556 and the additional 0.05 cents. So for 1920, the numbers that you see here are the ones, it's how I am estimating as of today that we're gonna end the current fiscal year. We're projecting a total revenues of 183.5 million, and moving into next year, increasing to 188.6 for a net increase of 5.1 million. Now, you might tell yourself, well, that's not a big increase, but you have to take into account that the local revenues for the current fiscal year did have a much greater revenues from other local sources, like the interest earnings that were in the 1.x million, lower them to $300,000. We had also more revenue for gate receipts, as well as for rentals and some other local sources. So that's why that increase that you see is not as great as you would be expecting with such a big property value growth. So in regards to the Tier 2 funding, so let's remember that the tax rate, the M&O tax rate is compressed of 2 rates, the Tier 1 rate, which is a compressed tax rate, and then the Tier 2 rate, which is every cent above that compressed tax rate that generates what they call the golden and the copper pennies, or the enrichment tax, it's also called. And so for this year, we are allowed to go up to 8 cents generate, golden cents are generated up to 8 cents above. Right now we have 4 cents, and we are proposing that 5th cent, and anything above that 5th cent on top of the compressed tax rate would trigger voter approved tax rate election, which would be held in November if that were the case. And just for illustration purposes, so you can know how much money is generated for each golden penny, we generate about $2.5 million. About $186,000 come from the local side, and from the state side, the Golden Pennies generate 1.6 million. Copper Pennies, of course, generate the same from the local side, but from the state, they generate about $382,000 for a total of 1.2 million. So our current tax rate has 4 Golden Pennies, and you're still allowed to go up to 17 cents with a TRE.
Well, let me just say one thing there, Georgiani. All this part, guys, is great news. I loved what Georgiani said earlier, and it's a way of thinking of it that I did not think of, and that is the higher our local tax base goes, the lower our tax rate goes. And so that is money in the pockets of our taxpayers.
Mm-hmm.
It gives us this flexibility, whether we go for TRE or not. Our tax rate is going to be significantly lower than it is this year as we go into next year.
True. Okay. Moving along with our expenditures. So just a reminder, like I mentioned before, we prepare this budget assuming normal operations. So once we have a very straight guidance from TEA and from the Return to School Committee as far as how we're going to operate next year, then we would be having to bring you adjustments as they are necessary. So under the expenditure assumptions, one of our strategic priorities was to provide for a competitive compensation package, and you guys did a great job at addressing that priority by approving a 4% general pay increase and a starting teacher pay of $58,100 with a control midpoint of $62,500. So each teacher is receiving approximately $2,500 plus targeted adjustments depending on their years of experience. We also approved a $50 increase on the monthly contributions towards medical premiums. And so employees are currently paying, or rather, the district is currently paying $250 towards medical premiums. This is increasing it to $300 a month for medical premiums. And also during the April board meeting, we approved 15 new teacher positions for the expanded pre-K program and English language learner teachers as well. And at the May board meeting, we approved counselors, 2 counselors and attendance clerk. We absorbed 2 outreach case managers that were being funded from a grant. We also approved several teacher aides and custodial support staff to address all the increase in square footage that we've had since we've been doing a lot of additions with the bond program, as well as to be able to address all the needs that we're going to be having next year with sanitizing and keeping our facilities clean. Oh, sorry. So we are projecting to end the year, this year, with a total expenditures of $180 million. Payroll constitutes $156.3 million, and the non-payroll expenditures $23.7 million. On the proposed budget for next year, yes, we did add requests, campus and department requests, but we also are going to be experiencing some significant savings in utilities, particularly with electricity. As you recall, last year you approved a new electricity contract, and so that's going to generate quite some savings. And we went ahead and we took a hard, look at that budget and really scraped as much as we could to try to provide more of a balanced budget as well. So again, based on how we're going to operate next year, we may need to come back to you and adjust that as we get more information and it becomes necessary. Our payroll is 166.3 for a total of 189.9 million, which is a 9.8 million variance from the projected actuals. Now, one thing that I do want to mention, because we do see that sometimes there is a lot of savings in payroll. I'm not sure how it's going to play out this next year. We typically see savings in where there's vacancies and they don't get filled right away. So savings accumulate over time. And also sometimes staff goes out on leave and they've exhausted their leave. So now they don't get paid after they exhaust their leave. So there's some savings. Typically you would see around a 1.5% to more or less a 1.5 to a 1.8% in savings in payroll. But for budget purposes, we have to budget at 100%. So 9.8 million variance there. Okay, so this is the full picture of our proposed budget. We have in the middle column 188.6 million in revenues with expenditures at 189.9. So our expenditures exceed our revenues by 1.2 million. And we are projecting to end this current fiscal year with 62.5 million. Again, that's depending on several factors as far as if we're able to reclassify any expenditures to the new grant where we're setting the funds that are going to come through COVID. By the way, we have to also apply for that grant, so it just creates a lot more work, but we'll do it. And so we're expecting to end this current fiscal year with 120 days in our fund balance reserve. And for next year, we're going to dip a little bit at 117 days. Now, that's very important that we have a healthy fund balance. We did prepare a 3-year budget outlook to the, as best as we could. If we were to assume a 1% property value growth in the next two fiscal years, the next biennium, and assuming around a 7.5% reduction in state aid for the next biennium, don't know that that's going to happen, or how much that reduction would be if there is one, but just making those assumptions, and static enrollment growth. And on the expenditure side, increasing our expenditures by 1% year after year, we do see that this current year that we're ending with a 61.3 million fund balance, for 2022, we would be dipping into the fund balance 11.1 million. So we'd still be in a good position as far as our reserve is concerned, which our reserve has to be at 90 days or more. And for 2022-23, that dip would be another 11.3 million.
Jenny,
Uh-huh.
if you go back to, I think it's slide 20, go back one. Yeah, I think this is an important slide, because I think board members have nervousness about, making sure that we're not, overestimating revenue or underestimating expenditures. And basically what I'd like to say there is, 1% property value growth is extremely conservative. I think we're going to be fine there. And the 7.5% reduction, I've never seen that even in the worst times in Texas. So I don't think it could be any worse than that. And I think that the legislature would be under pressure to make sure it didn't, because they just passed House Bill 3 in the last one and funded all this stuff. They can't come away from it too much. And then her third conservative element is static enrollment growth, essentially not believing we're gonna go up. Now, on the expenditure side, the one thing that should give you all pause, and myself, is that 1% increase is, we're not talking salary increases. There's a very good possibility that all that stays static for both of those years. It's a good thing we were able to do good things for the coming year, because we may not be able to continue that in the following 2 years thereafter.
Mhm.
Dr.
Colley,
Kelly.
Go ahead, Sean.
I'm assuming there's not a model that shows if there's a reduction for a large or a proportionate number of kids that decide that they're going to homeschool. I mean,
Mhm.
even if there was a 1 to 5% of the population that decided to homeschool, obviously that would affect our WADA.
Well, yes. Now, as you may remember from earlier discussions, a lot depends on what Georgiana described for next week on the 16th.
Right.
Will the commissioner and TEA basically allow funding for those parents who say, hey, I'm going to homeschool, but I want the school to provide the material, and I'm going to stay away from your schools. If that is allowed, as it was allowed for these 9 weeks that we just went through, we're in good shape. If not, or if there's some very stringent qualifications, then that would throw off our thinking to date.
And the other
Right.
thing,
So
go ahead.
Go ahead, Ms. Carbon.
No, go ahead, and I'll follow up with my question in a minute.
Yeah, the other thing is that, again, I might need to give you another update, probably based on the discussion on next Tuesday, in time for the budget adoption.
And then the expenditure category, the one thing that I don't see there that I think is a big unknown or sort of elephant in the room for me is the discussion over laptops and technology that's not covered in this expenditure assumptions at all.
Right.
That's in a later slide.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, I'll hold for it.
Yes. Okay. All right. So as far as the fund balance requirements, we have a very, very outdated resolution from 2011. Our current fund balance requirement based on that resolution is maintaining 25% or more of total operating expenditures in fund balance and 17% of unassigned fund balance. Currently, we're projecting a 33% fund balance. So our required fund balance reserve is 25%, is 47.47 million. So we're well below the requirement based on that resolution. And our unassigned fund balance is currently at 28%. In the next slide, I'm gonna go through what is in the current committed fund balance, which I am going to bring to the board for review this next budget. This next board meeting. Okay, so right here, as you see on the June 9th column, that is currently what is committed fund balance. We have a 1.5 million for major maintenance expenditures, 3 million for construction of new campuses, and 3 million for damages from a potential storm like a hurricane, or and then our non-spendables, which are end of the year prepaid inventory items, etc., 1.58 million. Now that's subject to change, of course, based on our final audited numbers. For this next, and this is more of a discussion right now, I just plopped some numbers out there, but it's more of a discussion. Since we have set up a maintenance a fund, the capital projects fund, I am going to recommend to remove that commitment, that $1.5 million commitment. And we don't foresee constructing any new campuses. We're still doing pretty well with our bonds. So I'm going to recommend to remove those $3 million as well. I do want to keep the $3 million commitment in the event that we have a named storm and we need to pay deductibles and such. And the non-spendable is subject to change, but about the same, 1.5 million. Now here, under the technology equipment, we have been meeting with Dell, and we have been meeting with Apple as well to see how much it would cost to provide tablets for every kiddo in pre-K through first grade. iPads for every kid pre-K through first grade, and tablets for second grade through the 12th grade. Now that cost, if we were to purchase it outright, so far is about 11.5 million. I'll have a summary for the next budget meeting. We're still negotiating and meeting with them. We have asked as well for what are the lease options available. And also things to consider is, do we charge fees, especially for perhaps not for the free kiddos that are eligible for free and reduced lunches, but perhaps charging a fee, annual fee, and then at the end of X number of years, 4 years, the device could belong to the child. So we're navigating through all that, but we do know that at least even if we lease, leasing can potentially cost us around, I'm thinking in my head, around $3 million per year. And so those are still hefty costs. And then we also have to consider additional costs that would come with it, such as additional staff to be able to service any damages or, fix the laptops and the computers and be able to provide it to the kids right away so they continue the instruction. So I am going to propose, potentially propose or discuss a $10 million commitment, initial commitment for funding technology equipment.
Okay, and I'd like
Or-
to,
So, Georgini, of all the equipment that we've distributed this, throughout this issue we have now, I know that they were older units. How many of those are actually part of their seeing their useful life and they're just kind of getting by, or how many can we carry over to the next year so that maybe we don't necessarily have to do the full
Right.
10 million the first year, but we stagger. I would really like to see a stagger for those numbers instead of having to do a wholesale replacement across all of those devices. That's what we ran into with IT right now. We had to go and replace so many teacher units, laptop carts, servers, all at one time, and that's a huge expense. So that's $30 million that we're going to have earmarked for IT in the short period.
Right, and I don't know if Greg Bartay is here. I don't have that information off the top of my head.
let me just say something there, Georgini. I'm not yet convinced about the idea that I essentially created to go forward with because of some of the expenses involved. And Georgini and others are looking at not only the cost of leases versus buying versus doing partial, versus doing a lot, but also the personnel costs associated with it because they become permanent. In other words, if we start adding technicians to maintain all these computers, I even have another idea, and I haven't looked through it yet, which is, can we provide free laptops to economically disadvantaged kids, and with the rest, say to them, we have a $500 instrument. We'll subsidize the cost $250 of that, and you pay the other $250 if you want to be on the same exact machine that others are on, or something. So, bottom line is, I have some more thinking to do, and the administration, before we bring this proposal to you and can say with assurance, yes, we can afford this, and we're not jeopardizing long-term financial health or anything like that by doing it. I am convinced that doing this, if we were able to do it fully, is a good giant step forward for us because it lessens, it creates a much better learning environment for any time we have to go to the hybrid or the distance learning environment. There's no debate over that. But how much we can afford and how fast, please give us until the 23rd to refine what we're asking.
Georgini, right, because it is ideal to have a, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Do you know of any grants that may be upcoming that could be available to offset some of those costs?
I mean, not yet.
Okay.
Not yet, but like, for example, that could potentially be an expenditure that we can use for the CARES Act, but that's only, 1.some million. So everything that we're doing as far as procurement, we're being very careful on how we procure it, in making sure that we adhere to federal guidelines, because in the event that there is a grant, And let's say that we purchased some equipment, like we just purchased some laptops. I think we spent like $200,000 about a month or 2 months ago. You know, in the event that they make the funding retroactive, you know, I want to make sure that we're able to recapture those funds. So we are looking at all those possibilities, at any funding opportunities. I do agree as well. I much rather stagger the purchase of the devices. Is the best way to do it. Now, it's all going to depend on, again, how we present it to you, how our operations are going to look next year as far as instruction is concerned. Are we going to have a lot of online instruction? Of course, the pros of having the same devices, like Dr. Kelly said, you have a standard equipment, so it's easier to fix the devices, install the programs, etc. So, but yes, we're still going through everything, and at the next board meeting, we're going to bring to you some proposal with several options.
Virginia has got her hand
Well,
up.
thank you. Dr. Kelly, let me just interrupt just real quick. I want to let the members know that, yeah, I know this is a big deal for us, that we really want to have some discussion on, you know, and give some input on this. But let's keep in mind that administration is still working through this, so the details are not ready for us. But just keep that in mind as we go ahead. Okay, Mrs. Carbone, then Mr. Bakken.
So I was looking back at last meeting's agenda, and there was a update on the technology bond funds there, and it looks like there's about $1.7 million that's left over. Would those funds potentially be able to be contributing to this fight in any way?
Yes, I would say yes. What they represent right now, yeah, like Georgiani said, it'd be better if Greg Barté was with us on this, but I think pretty much we have done as much or more than we anticipated to do with the $19 million for the bond. So I think we do have that freedom should we choose to use it.
And is there any other underage or left, like, that we haven't spent in bond money that could be allocated just towards the device piece?
Oh, I see. You mean in the non-technology portions? Yes. And I think we've been giving you very conservative numbers on how much will be saved. That amount will grow. I think it's in the last few ones that you've gotten, it's about 3.5 million. I think that's right. And I think that number will grow. So yes, that could be. Now, I don't want to get too carried away there because I have lived under the luxury. The very first thing, if you remember, we repaired Carlston and Lawhon a few years ago using bond funds that were held in reserve all the way from 2006. So it also helps to save some money as we go forward.
Understood.
That is true.
Mr. Bakken?
Yes, Georgiani, when you I don't know if you misspoke, but you said pre-K through 1 and then 2nd through 12th grade, I believe. You said, you mentioned the word tablets. I want to be very clear.
Are you
talking about
I'm sorry.
Okay. All right.
Laptops. I'm sorry. Yes.
That's okay. Thank you.
iPads for the little kiddos and laptops for 2nd grade and up. And we're looking at Dell right now.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and then, so of course, there's going to be a lot more discussion with that. And then on the next part of the fund balance commitment that I would, that I think it would be great if we can commit those funds is for some sort of state revenue stabilization. So in the event that we do lose some funds, that we get some funding cuts, that we can tap into that reserve and use those funds to make up for the difference that we receive from the state. So for those, basically for those next 2 years that we're projecting about a $12.5 million. And so if we were to commit those funds as they're stated there, not exactly that we will, but I do want to have that discussion, we would be looking at having an unassigned fund balance at the end of the year of 17%, which is still within policy. So we would have over 90 days reserve total fund balance and unassigned 17%.
Yeah. Well, you know,
I'm
our
gonna-
goal has always been to be at the 25% figure.
Mhm.
You see in that first column there. So we're in good shape there.
Mhm.
We don't want to dip below that 28%,
Right.
anything below 25%.
Okay. That is all I have for the general fund. I'm gonna move into the food service. Okay. So for the food service, we also prepared a brief end of the year projection. So for this end of the year, due to COVID, we did see a decrease in meal service revenue from $55,000 a day to $6,270 per day. And of course, while the meal revenue declined, we still paid all of our employees. So our labor expenses remain consistent. We use current on-hand inventory to provide curbside meals. So we did have a reduction in purchases. So that's, and then we were also unable to receive reimbursement for the virtual learning scenario. So those are the effects of COVID-19 on this fund. And now for 2021, the possible budget impact, and it's a big if, right? If hybrid or the distance option is required, and a bunch of other ifs that we're not fully aware of yet. We may see a 50% reduction in meal service without the USDA waiver, if there is not a waiver, to continue that non-congregate meal service. A 50% reduction in food and supply costs while continuing to cover 100% of the labor costs. This one is tough, an 8 to 10 week lead time in the fall for the distributors to fulfill the orders. And of course, there's no accurate way to determine a shortfall because we've never had this type of event happen in the past. So we don't have historical data to go by. But we did build next year's budget based on normal operations. So for this year, we are expecting our revenues that projected is a projected actual of 8.1 million. And our expenditures are at 9.1 million. So we're gonna see a $1 million dip into the fund balance with an ending fund balance of 2.2 million, which is a 21% fund balance reserve. Now, in terms of food service, a 21% fund balance is okay. As far as revenues is concerned for next school year, we projected 10.3 million and expenditures of 10.4 million for a 2.1 million ending fund balance. So still projected within a good 20% fund balance in that food service fund.
Yeah, let me add something there, Georgianne. I'm not worried about this area at all. We've always had a very, very healthy food service balance. The worst scenario is, as Georgianne explained, that next year we're continuing to deal with the pandemic. Beyond that, if things return to anything close to normal, we essentially, I don't want to call it make money, but we always are in a good position in food service. So that's just not an area that I'm concerned about, even if the worst case scenario comes and we do take a hit to the food service fund balance for 1 year.
That's correct. I'm going to move on to the debt service fund. With the debt service fund, we are projecting to end this current fiscal year with a $24.4 million fund balance. It's very important that we're reminded that that $24.4 million includes the August interest payment of $9.7 million. So for estimating our fund balance reserve, I'm estimating 43% as I deduct that $9.7 million. The proposed budget includes revenues of $38 million, maintaining the same tax rate, and operating expenditures of $34.2 for a surplus of $3.8 million. The ending fund balance is $28.2 million projected for proposed for next year. Now, I do want to mention that the expenditures does not include the cost of defeasing bonds, which John Roebuck is going to talk about right now, or the cost associated with refunding bonds. So what we're projecting with the debt service, which is a really good thing, if we are able to keep the tax rate at the same rate this year, we will be able to significantly reduce the tax rate in the coming year. So right now we have a 0.4256 rate, and our decrease that is projected for next year, if we keep the same tax rate this year, and if we do some bond refundings and defeasance of debt, it will be 0.3914, and it should remain for the long run.
And again, this is very good news to the taxpayers, and it is better than we promised, significantly better than when we passed the 2016 bond election.
Way, way better. So the next steps as far as the budget is concerned, of course, at the June 23rd board meeting, we will be adopting, bringing the budget for adoption. We will want to review and approve any fund balance commitments that we may want to do for the end of the year. We'll continue monitoring the COVID pandemic, and of course now the new guidance that is coming from TEA in regards to attendance and accounting funding, and monitor any other state, federal, and local decisions as they come through. This is just for information. I already discussed them in the prior slide, the steps if not conducting a VADR and if conducting a VADR.
Well, let me say one thing there. If you all decide to go for a TRE, just if, then we would need to make decisions probably in the latter part of July. So I know we normally do not have a board meeting in the July except for hiring, but if we decide to go down that road, we would need to do that in July.
And I have John Roebuck with us. We wanted to briefly discuss that bond refunding and the bond defeasance.
All right, I keep interrupting, Georgianne. Mr. President, this really concludes the budget hearing part. The rest is going to be about the bond, so I'm not sure if you want to interject something there or just go right on to John Roebuck and bond defeasance.
We were thinking
Close out the hearing, right?
Yeah, we could close out the hearing.
Yes, that's what I was thinking. So before we do that though, let me open up the floor to the attendees, the members of the public who are with us. That is the entire budget presentation from administration. So if you had any questions that you'd like to bring up, please do. And if you click the, I believe, the reactions or the participant tab, you can raise your hand and we'll give you the floor. Okay, asking again for the purpose of the record. All right, we have no questions from the floor. Mr. Berry, did I hear you wanting to weigh in on something?
I just said I was going to wait for John.
Okay, great. Okay, well in that case, thank you very much for the budget presentation, Mrs. Carter.
Great job, Georgianne.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I'm gonna.
Let me go ahead and end the public meeting at 7:50 p.m. and we'll continue to flow into the workshop. And Mr. Roebuck, the floor is yours.
I am going to share his slides. Give me just 1 second, please.
Can you all hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Got you. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are y'all doing?
Good.
Good.
Man,
I think I've got some good news. After that wonderful presentation by Georgianne, hopefully we can show some savings and impact for the tax rate going forward. That's very positive for the district.
All right.
Give me just 1 second. I'm about to share it. I'm not seeing it here. Apologize about that. I'm having trouble sharing the screen. Here it is. Perfect. Go ahead.
All right.
All right. Thank you, Georgini. Well, President, again, members of the board, and Dr. Kelly, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to talk about a refunding opportunity and also another opportunity to do a cash defeasance and to save some money by taking some excess revenues, depending on how the final values come in this year, to defease some bonds and also generate additional savings for the district. Georgina, if you don't mind going to the first page in the presentation, as I always like to do, I like to start off with the overview of the bond buyer index, the bond market, if you will. Again, this is a weekly index of municipal bonds across the country. You'll notice that we hit a low during the pandemic, ironically, of 2.25% on the index. We've bounced around. It's been a relatively volatile market for the last 3 months, but I'm happy to report the last 2 weeks, we've actually hit another all-time low at 2.16%. That's where we've been for the last 2 weeks, and rates have remained relatively steady since then. Now, the Fed is having their meetings today and tomorrow, so I don't think there's gonna be surprises. I don't think they're going to change the rate. We're already as low as you possibly can get. I don't think they'll go negative. So I think we're going to see an interest rate environment that's very, very low and very favorable for the district to refund some bonds later this year. On page 2 of the presentation, this is a quick summary of interest cost savings the district has locked in over the last 10 years. The district has implemented 7 bond refunding programs that have saved over $30.4 million in interest. And then they've also prepaid or cash defeased $1,220,000 in 2017 that locked in an additional $262,000. So really over the last 10 years, the steps the board has made to reduce interest costs has generated more than $30.696 million for taxpayers, which is a significant number. On the next page, this is a summary of the district's outstanding bonds and their call provisions. This I guess chart has become more and more valuable as we've moved on through the years since the Tax Act of 2017. The Tax Act of 2017, as you recall, basically reduced our ability to refinance bonds when we wanted to on a tax-exempt basis. We can only refund bonds on a current basis, meaning we cannot refund debt that's outside 90 days from the call date. So you notice on this chart here, we have 4 issues highlighted in gray that have a call date, or 3 of the 4 have a call date of 2/15 of 2021, which means we can call these bonds, sell them in October, deliver them in November. We have to deliver them after November 15th of 2020, which falls within that current call provision, which allows us to lock in savings and a current refunding on a tax-exempt basis. The 2013B, if you'll notice, was issued as a taxable bond, and because of the new rule, we can tax-exempt refund taxable bonds because we don't have the dual tax-exempt credit outstanding for multiple bonds. So we can refund those on a tax-exempt basis at the same time and generate interest cost savings. But this chart, again, kind of shows you some of the bonds that are available to be called and when they're able to be called. And as a result, on the next page, these are the bonds we're proposing to be refunded on November 17th of this year. We have outstanding bonds from 2001B bonds, the 2011, 2012, and 2013 Bs for a total of $93,730,000 in bonds. The outstanding bonds have interest rates ranging from 3% to 5%. And based on current market rates, we're estimating the district can save a significant amount of money. And that's shown on the next page. Based on today's interest rate environment, we believe by refunding those bonds mentioned in the prior page, we can save about $10.2 million in interest cost savings. It represents about a 10.12 present value savings, or about $1,280,000 a year. So significant savings. Again, we are limited when we can do this early, so we can actually sell these bonds as early October, deliver February 15th. As a result of this refunding, on the next page, we input this into the tax rate model. Now, I know y'all seen this tax rate model several times since the 2016 election. But the gray columns on the far right are what the original projection were that we told taxpayers what the tax rate would be based on the bond election. Maximum tax rate was 44.56 cents on the interest and sinking fund tax rate only. We're currently at 42.56 on the INS tax rate, which is well below, a penny below what we told taxpayers we would be right now anyway. And we're proposing that we keep the tax rate the same for the next tax year to generate the additional revenue that we'll use to defease some bonds. If we do this and implement the refunding, we believe we'll be able to lower the tax rate the following year by 3.4 cents, or a little over 3.4 cents, to 39.14, which is well below what we told taxpayers during the 2016 bond election cycle. And to accomplish this, if you go to the next page, Georgini, I have the wrong date on here. We're proposing to come back to you on June 23rd to have the board discuss the refunding and approve a permanent order to allow us to move forward with selling these refunding bonds. We'll do the permanent school fund guarantee, which will allow us to sell the bonds as a AAA bond issue. We'll draft the offering document, do the rating and diligence calls, and then sell again that first week of October, and then deliver and close the bond issue and lock in the savings, realize the savings on November 17th, 2020. And then Georgini also spoke about the cash defeasance, and this is shown on the next page. Actually, Georgina, I'm sorry, go back to the tax rate model on page 6, I believe page 6. You'll notice there on the 2020, right there, sorry. The 2020-2021 tax year, we got a bold number of less INS fund contribution of negative $2.6 million. Our calculations show that is the amount that we can use to cash defease bonds to maintain that tax rate of 42.56 on the INS side. Now, on the next part of the presentation, I'm sorry to flip around you, Georgini. If you'll go to page, I think it's 8.
John, can I interrupt just 1 second?
Sure.
I just want to point out to the board that this 0.3914 tax rate, before that 0.3914, our tax rate used to be 0.3756 before this bond. So in essence, the total increase on the tax rate, would you say, is 1.5 cents?
Going into 21-22, yes, ma'am. From the original tax rate to the maximum tax rate, it was 5 cents as opposed to the 7 cents we told taxpayers during the election process. So we came in 2 cents lower than we projected, and I think we'll come in well below that by the time this is all said and done. So we'll continue to lower the rate.
Georgini, if you don't mind.
Well, our tax rate prior to the 2017 bond was 0.3756. Then we had the 2017 bond, and we stated we were going to increase 7 cents. But right now, as it stands, the difference between the 0.3756 and the 0.394 is 1.58 cents.
So it's just easy. Complicated way of saying that we're doing a whole lot better than what we originally.
A whole lot better, yes.
For that 7 cents.
That's what I was trying to say. I'm sorry for interrupting, John.
No, that's great, and I think based on that slide where we showed the bonds that have call dates coming up in the future, I think we'll be able to even see potentially some more savings as we go forward in the years to come. But again, until we get there, I can't say what the savings would be, or if the interest rate environment will be in a place where we can generate savings to refund these bonds. But more likely than not, we will see some refundings down the road in 2022 and 2023 that will allow us to reduce that tax rate even more.
John, can you help me and kind of dummy it down for me? You know, I'm not the numbers one of the family. Can you explain to me the INS rate and the fund balance in INS? And you're saying that the reason that we can't, or that we should hold off lowering that part of the tax rate until next year, is that you can use that extra fund balance to pay down some of that debt as it's being restructured? Question mark?
Well, yes, that's part of it. The other part of it is we could probably lower the tax rate a little bit this year on the INS side, but because we're being compressed already, we might as well take advantage and keep the INS tax rate the same, use that difference and actually reduce the debt service for the next couple of years even more should the district decide to do TRE.
So what you're saying is if we hold off now, the compression later makes a greater long-term benefit?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And really,
Is there,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
John?
Yes.
Yeah. And maybe Georgiani can answer this a little bit better. What would the effect on our INS and M&O rates be if we did a TRE?
Well,
No effect on the INS. The TRE would only affect the M&O side.
Right.
and that depends, what we're going to advise you without the TRE first is that you go from what we call 4 golden pennies to 5. And
Right.
Georgiana was explaining that earlier. Then
Right.
let's say that we are 6 cents, we're still 5 to 6 cents below the current tax rate as we go into next year. Then we would be advising to you maybe going up by what, Georgiana, 1 or 2 pennies where we think, it brings in 2 point, whatever it is, 2.5.
Right. I would advise to go all the way up to the 8 golden pennies. So 3 additional pennies, which would bring us an additional, each penny is about 2.5 million.
And
So it would be
the
about
bottom line,
7.5 million.
Georgiana,
Mhm.
the bottom line would still be that our tax rate after we do that
Yes.
and the TRE passes is still lower than the current tax rate right now by
That is correct.
2 pennies.
So that's, I guess, what I'm asking on the INS side. Would it be more palatable to the voters if we pushed that rate down lower now to offset some of that expense about going up with the 8 pennies? But I feel like what you're saying is the long-term gain, even though we would maximize the state revenue by going up on the golden pennies from the M&O side, if we reduce the INS rate to offset some of that growth, that we're shooting ourselves in the foot effectively on the INS side by the potential growth we could gain from leaving the INS rate the same this year and then
Yes.
going down by that 3 cents.
Yes, yes, Crystal, but let me add one more additional positive factor, and that is by doing this method, we still preserve room if we don't do a TRE this year with a reduced INS rate next year, the year after, the year after that. We hope that that also may help be palatable to the voters. Just not clear yet what the state will do in the next biennium, but having a lower INS rate in the future certainly won't hurt.
So the potential is that our values go up by, if we estimate conservatively by another percent value, the compression goes down by that much more and creates a gap there. And then the INS rate drops so that we have a little bit of a gap to go up by that 4 next year and still be an equal playing field for our tax rate remaining level, I guess is what we're saying.
Lower than level, but yeah, good.
Are we on the same page then?
John?
We are, and really the compression the state has put on the district, we're seeing across the state. Obviously the M&O rates being dictated by whatever your growth is, and the compression rate the state is dictating to you. But your INS is separate and apart from that, and so if any flexibility you can maintain with that INS tax rate by keeping it steady now and still giving taxpayers a reduction in the overall tax rate, which you will be doing this year based on the proposal. Next year, we can see an even lower or a larger decrease for the taxpayers in the tax rate because of the actions we're taking now.
Oh, good.
And also just add a little more insult to injury, we are not really sure exactly what's going to happen to the COVID values, post-COVID values. We're not going to see that happen this year because values have already been assessed. They've already been locked in, I guess, if you will. We'll see it next January 1 of 2021, where you'll see potentially a drop in value if the impact of the economy is as bad as initially people thought, which we could argue that's probably not as bad as we initially thought. But if there is any impact, the values would probably drop in that year, not this year. And so we'll have that flexibility with the reduction in the INS tax rate.
And in that case, you're essentially providing a cushion on the
Right.
INS side for lower tax values.
So do you, John, have relationships with districts when it comes to TRE elections, or you're strictly on the bond side?
We have helped with the TRE. We've actually got Omar Garcia is on our staff. He's the state funding guru. He's actually developed a template for which all school districts use to determine what their tax rate and what funding they'll receive from the state.
So do you see other districts across the state partaking or like going out for a TRE this year in comparison to waiting? Or what do you see as the flavor across the district right now, knowing that the biennium is coming and it's probably going to hurt?
I know I've not heard much about TREs this year. In the past, it was the hot topic in a lot of school districts. In fact, I've got, I believe, 4 or 5 school districts I work with that asked TREs before the compression hit, for the changes in the tax rate.
Let me add to that, Crystal. We're late to the party. A very large number of districts have already done their TRE. I forget, we calculated it for all the Houston districts. Am I right? Was it 2/3 or something?
If not higher than that, Dr. Kelly.
TRE already. And so we're a little late to that party. So they don't need to do one because they've already done one, basically.
Understood. Thank you.
So they're taking advantage of all the golden pennies, or at least 6 golden pennies.
Okay. Most are not taking advantage of the copper pennies, or?
It depends. There are some that went all the way to the $1.17, before the tax rate was compressed.
Yeah, they did a 13-cent increase.
Yes. John, which slide do you want me to go to?
Go to the cash defeasance real quick, and we'll show the impact of just that $2.6 million. We showed the tax rate model and how much savings it can generate.
There you go.
So if we take that $2.6 million, that quote unquote, revenue from keeping the tax rate the same, and we do a order which basically says we're going to do a defeasance order next tax year, we keep the tax rate the same. So they're kind of one and the same. We can't do the defeasance unless we keep the tax rate the same, and if we keep the tax rate the same, we'll need to do this defeasance to show that we're not over 11 on the tax rate. So we'd ask the board to approve that order like we did in 2017, prior to the end of the tax year. So we ask you to approve that at the next meeting on the 23rd when we approve the parameter order for the refunding. But based on the $2.6 million, we can refund or cash defease $2,240,000 from the 2014 bonds that generate the most economic savings for the district. And so if we take that $2,645,000, we pay those bonds off, we'll generate estimated debt service savings of about $1.58 million over the life of that defeasance. As a result of that defeasance, if Georgina, if you go to the next page, we can lower the tax rate even more next year. So by using that $2 million, we can take the tax rate we were estimating, I believe it was 39.14 down to 39.06. So reduce the tax rate by a full 3.5 cents going into the 21-22 tax year or fiscal year.
Right.
So that's the power of just $2.5 million. We can reduce your tax rate even that much further for the long term. And again, on the next page, Georgini, to accomplish this, we would ask you to approve a cash defeasance or an escrow resolution, and then we would come back later knowing what the exact amount is from the values once they've been certified in cash defease those, start the process on March 2nd, and then by March 18th, actually pay those bonds off and recognize the savings.
Okay.
And I'd be happy to answer any questions regarding this. I believe Dan Martinez is on the phone also. He's your bond counsel.
Yes.
He'll be the one drafting the orders that we're going to ask you to approve on the 23rd. I'm sure you have any questions about those. I'm sure he'd be happy to answer those. But if you have any questions about the finance structure or the schedule of events, I'll be happy to answer those questions.
I have one last question if no one else does. Of course I do. I still don't understand completely the term defeasance and kind of what the definition of that is and what really we're approving there?
That's a great question. It's just a big term we use in our business to say pay off.
Okay.
All we're doing when we say defease is a technical term, legal term that basically says you're taking bonds and you're setting them in escrow where you're actually using cash and paying them off with cash at a specific point in time that makes them no longer the obligation of the district.
You know, Crystal, the way I think about it, and John, you can correct me if I completely misunderstand, but defeasance is like paying off your mortgage. Refunding bonds is like getting a better interest rate.
Okay.
Right.
That makes perfect sense.
Very good.
Much appreciated.
And I think just to add what John said, this is Dan, as he mentioned, once you defease the debt, it's off your books, technically. It's only to be paid out of funds that are placed in that escrow that John's been describing.
Which will get verified by an independent accounting firm and make sure that it's sufficient to cover the debt. So at that point, it legally will be no longer the obligation of the district, but the obligation of that escrow we establish.
All right.
All right.
Yeah, we appreciate that. Board, I just want to make sure I don't have any other questions on either the budget or the refunding and defeasance. Well, I guess that is your go ahead to move ahead. So we'll hear from you again. Obviously, we'll have the final budget presentation on the 23rd, and we'll hear again for the parameter order on the 23rd as well, and that process will move ahead. Okay.
I guess, Charles, if we're ending the budget discussion itself, the only other question I had is when we're going to have a discussion as a board about the TRE itself and kind of guidance about what direction we're hoping to go or waiting, kind of pursuing it this year, or waiting for next year. I feel like the admin really needs some direction in that regard, but maybe.
I second that question.
Yeah, oh, that's a good point. When Dr. Kelly, we'll need to give you guidance on that. We'll need to make some decisions on that in July, is what you were saying. And usually we have, well, I'll tell you what, Dr. Kelly, I'll follow up with you and we'll see about that June 23rd meeting to see if we can insert an item to discuss, actually your recommendations on and allow the board to chew on whether or not to move towards a TRE. And if that doesn't happen, then we can slide it in for a
July meeting.
in July.
Sounds good. Yes, sir.
Okay. So Dr. Kelly and I will follow up on that, and I'll keep the board through Dr. Kelly. I'll keep y'all up to date on when we're going to look at that.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. Mrs. Carter, Mr. Roebuck, thank y'all very much for your time. We appreciate the information. And John, it's always good to see you because every time we see you, we save money.
Will you tell my wife that?
Cost money.
Yeah, every time I see her.
Well, it takes money to make money, what they used to. All right.
Yeah.
Anyway,
We can argue that. Maybe discuss it another time.
Dr. Kelly, what I'm seeing is that we are complete with the agenda. Are there any other things? Okay, so we're good to go.
Yes, sir. We're
All
good.
right, members, administration, members of the public, thank you so much for joining us. We will adjourn this meeting at 8:15 p.m.